Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a pretty wild idea. What if the skills you use to break down a classic novel are the exact same skills we need to understand artificial intelligence? We tend to think of technology as being totally neutral. It's just code, right? Ones and zeros. But here's the thing. AI learns by consuming, well, pretty much everything we've ever written. And in that giant digital library, it doesn't just learn facts, it also learns all of our hidden, unconscious prejudices. And that is the key, because this is exactly what literary studies has been doing for ages, peeling back the layers of a story to find the things the author didn't even know they were saying. It's about reading between the lines and seeing the hidden assumptions that shape our world. So, how do we become detectives of AI bias? Well, it turns out that if you've ever had to analyze a book for an English class, you've already got the toolkit you need. It's going to look really, really familiar. Okay, so think about it like this. In literature, we always ask whose stories get told and whose get ignored. We have to ask the exact same question about AI's training data. Who's writing most of the internet? Which cultures and viewpoints are everywhere? Because whatever's most dominant in the data, well, that's what shapes the AI's entire worldview. What's so fascinating is how perfectly these skills map onto each other. The mental muscles you use to analyze gender roles in a Victorian novel are the same ones you use to see how an AI talks about gender. It's all about critical thinking. We're just analyzing a new kind of text, one written by an algorithm. All right, theory is one thing, but let's put this into practice. We're going to run a couple of simple experiments inspired by the research of Professor Dalit Barad to see these biases in action. This is where it gets really interesting. So for our first test, let's put on our feminist literary critic hats. We know that for centuries, stories have tended to put men in roles of power and intellect. So the question is, has AI picked up that same old habit? Let's find out. Now notice, that prompt is completely gender neutral. It just says, a scientist. But our hypothesis, our guess, is that the AI, having been trained on all those historical texts, is going to default to what it knows. It's seen this pattern 1,000 times before, so it's probably going to make the hero a man. And yep, there he is, Dr. Edmund Bellamy. The AI could have created anyone, but it spit out a male scientist. It's like a digital echo of old biases, a perfect reflection of the patterns that are baked right into the data it learned from. Okay, so that's an unconscious bias. Let's switch gears and look at something a little different. For this next test, we're going to see if an AI's answers change depending on the political environment of the country where it was made. Now check this out. It's pretty revealing. You ask these different AI models about various world leaders, and most of them will give you critical information. But when the Chinese model DeepSeek gets a tough question about its own government, bam, it just shuts down. A total wall of silence. So, whoa, this is a whole different ballgame. This isn't an accident or an echo of old books. This isn't intentional, programmed filter. It's a really stark example of how things like national interests and censorship can be hard-coded right into an AI's brain, telling it what it can and absolutely cannot talk about. Okay, but all of this brings up a really thorny question, doesn't it? Everything comes from some kind of perspective. So where do we draw the line? When does a simple point of view cross over into being a harmful prejudice? Let's use a specific case to figure this out. Imagine you ask an AI about this flying chariot, and it calls it mythical. Now, you could argue, hey, that's a bias. You're dismissing my culture's knowledge as a fairy tale. And that's a fair point, but is it actually a prejudice? Here's how we can test it. It's a simple three-step process. The key isn't what the AI calls the chariot. It's about consistency. You then have to ask it about a flying horse from Greek myth or a flying hammer from Norse myth. If it calls all of them mythical, then okay, it's just applying the same standard everywhere. But if it treats one culture's story as a myth while treating another's as history, that's when you've caught a real prejudice in the act. So, after all that, what are we supposed to do with this information? What's the big takeaway for how we should be using these incredibly powerful tools every day? First things first, let's be realistic. The idea of creating a perfectly neutral, totally unbiased AI, it's a fantasy. It's just not going to happen. Because AI learns from us, from humans, and we all have perspectives. A point of view is unavoidable. And this quote from Professor Barad just hits the nail on the head. The real danger isn't that bias exists. The danger is when one particular bias becomes so dominant that we stop seeing it as a bias at all. It becomes invisible. We just start thinking of it as the way things are, as universal truth. So the goal isn't to find some mythical, perfect AI. The real goal is for us to become better, more critical users. It's about taking out that literary detective's toolkit and using it to make the invisible visible, to question the answers we get, and to understand the built-in limitations of the tech we're dealing with. And that's really what it all comes down to. Every day, from your social media feed to your search results, AI is quietly helping to shape your reality. The only question is, now that you have the tools to look for them, what invisible biases are you going to find?